We're probably going to see some brand new Mac computers coming out this fall, but one thing I do not think we're going to see are touch screen interfaces on those Macs. Not only are we not going to see those this fall, but we're probably not going to see those anytime in the near future. I bring this up because in the comments section from time to time I get comments like this one. I think we can agree that the iPad Pro with Mac OS X would be pretty awesome. Come on, Apple, give me my MacBook crammed into a tablet with pen support. I totally get where this comment is coming from. In fact, over the last couple years, I've seen a lot of people talking online about this idea, like, wouldn't it be cool if we had a Mac like the Surface where I could use a pen and I could just draw on my Mac instead of using an iPad Pro with a scaled down software? It just would be so much better. And I totally get that. I mean, artists don't want to settle for like scaled down software on the iPad, even though it's a pretty good experience. What I've done is I've broken it down into 3 reasons why I'm pretty confident we're not going to see anything like this in the near future, so don't get your hopes up. First is the processors that are used in Macs and iOS devices like the phone and the iPad are totally different. Whereas the Mac OS is built on top of Intel chips, the iOS stuff is built on top of the ARM architecture. The code would have to be completely rewritten from the ground up to accommodate for this. You'll notice when you look at these devices, your phone doesn't have any ventilation, your iPad doesn't have any ventilation, but when you look at the side of your Mac or any PC, even the Surface Pro, since it has an Intel chip, that's going to run hotter and it needs that ventilation. Now, this doesn't mean that at some point in the future, Apple might actually rewrite their operating system to work with different processors. They've done it before. They used to run on Motorola processors back in the day, and they switched over to Intel several years ago. But I don't think they're going to just change that on the fly, and we're going to see that especially this fall or even in the next year or so. And the reason why is reason number 2 for this video. And the main reason is the new operating system Sierra just came out last week, so I don't see them writing a new version of their operating system and releasing it right after they've done something like that. And nowhere in this operating system, at least to my knowledge, is there anything that's really catered towards a touch-based interface. The schedule that Apple has been on for years is they announced their operating systems in June at their WWDC conference, and they usually roll these things out in September or October, and they've done that again this year. And adding touch to an operating system is not a small change. In fact, it's a rather large change. It's one of those things where you have to look at every single interaction that you're taking within an operating system and rewrite it to make sure that it's an optimal experience for that device. It's also one of those things that you want to give your app developers a little bit of a heads up on so they know what to develop for. You don't want to just release something and have half the apps running on your Mac just flat out not support it. Which runs straight into number 3, which is the user experience of this entire thing. This one's going to be a long one, so just bear with me for a minute. Using a Mac with a touchscreen is kind of a terrible experience. Don't believe me? Try using AstroPad or try using Duet Display. I'm not knocking these pieces of software, it's just that what they're doing is they're replicating a screen on a Mac, and you can use touch with it, you can use the Apple Pencil with it, but it's not that good of an experience controlling the Mac operating system itself. Usually when I think about the way I use something like AstroPad is I open up Photoshop, I set it to the width that I need, and I'm only using that when I'm using AstroPad. I'm not switching between programs using that. I usually jump back to the mouse and the keyboard to do that because it's just frankly very hard to use the operating system with touch. There are these tiny areas that you have to tap, or if you have to double tap something, good luck hitting the same little item twice in a row. Things like clicking and dragging, which are just very basic with a mouse, become kind of harder with touch. Am I trying to select multiple items, or am I trying to drag that one item? It's hard to tell in a touch interface. Every single interaction in the Mac's operating system has to be looked at and investigated and thought about from a completely different perspective. Now, Apple wouldn't be the first company that has attempted to put touch into its operating system. Obviously, Microsoft has been doing this for years, ever since the release of Windows 8. Windows 8, wonder if people liked that. The reason there was so much reluctance to Windows 8 is because they broke so many of the conventions that we're used to using on a computer in order to accommodate for this brand new way of using a computer. A lot of the power features that people were used to, things like the start menu, all of a sudden became this big, huge screen. A lot of these elements that you had to have that were larger to accommodate for touch were just not is good to use for people who didn't have a touch screen. And years later, with all these OS updates, they have refined it and they've made it so much better, but they're still finding little things to tweak. And this doesn't just fall on Microsoft to improve this. All the app makers and people who develop websites and everything, they have to be on board with these changes too, and those changes take time. And while that time is occurring, the experience just isn't very good. In fact, I write this video on Google Docs, and while I'm using Google Docs, On my Surface, which I do all the time, I love typing on the Surface, just using touch to open a document, you can't do it. You can't open a folder by double tapping it. It increases the screen size. This is Dropbox, and I have hundreds of Dropbox folders that I have for projects and things that I've worked on in the past, and I don't want to sync gigs and gigs and gigs worth of data to my computer. So I use selective sync, but I have to check all these arrows. It's impossible to do with your finger. In fact, it's very hard to do even with just a pen. All these little interactions build up and either make a really good user experience or a really bad user experience. In fact, Craig Federighi, Apple's Senior Vice President of Software Engineering, was asked about this very thing, and he pointed to a MacBook Air and said, "This device has been honed over 30 years to be optimal for keyboards and mice." And that really drives down to the core of that experience that you're having when you're using a computer. And this is probably the part of the video where 50 of you have already run to the comment section to say, "But Steve Jobs said we'd never have a stylus on our iOS devices, and last year we got the Apple Pencil." And that's totally true, but I think there is a clear differentiation between the pencil and the keyboard, which we got last year for the iPad, and what we're talking about here for the Mac OS. An iPad works extraordinarily well without a keyboard and without the Apple Pencil. It is a smooth interface and a great experience. But if you want to write or draw, having a pencil improves that. If you type a lot, if you're writing a lot, having a keyboard improves that. They add to the experience, whereas touch on a Mac, I think, would initially anyway, take away from that experience. I'm not saying I hate touch interfaces. In fact, I love touch interfaces. What I am saying here is that I just don't see Apple adding this feature just for the sake of having another feature that's just very un-Apple-like. I also think about the way that I use my Surface and when I use touch. And if it's sitting in my lap, I'll use it to just kind of scrub through a web page or something like that. But most of the time, it's up on my desk. And when it's on my desk, you know, reaching across to touch the screen, I never do it, especially since my hands are already resting on either a mouse or the trackpad, and I can do everything from there. I don't need to use touch. Some people have also mentioned that when you use a touch screen, your arm is reaching out, your arm could get fatigued and tired. I've never had this problem because I am incredibly strong and have huge muscles. But I can totally see how this is a problem for most normal people. So I get it. I totally understand why you would want a touchscreen on a Mac. On many levels, it makes a lot of sense, and it seems like a cool thing. It just seems very un-Apple. I don't see them actually bringing anything like that out anytime soon. You look like you have opinions. I bet you have opinions. Let me know over on Twitter, or of course, the comments are always open for that sort of thing. Also, if you enjoyed this video or any of my other videos, please consider giving to my Patreon page. It helps support me and helps support my drawing tablet habit. Other than that, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in a week or two.